Hey guys, this is Chris from The Blazing Show with Chris, and I am here with Sam Webb. Hey Sam, you're on.
Yes, okay.
And you are Sam Webb. Welcome to the
Yes,
show,
I
Sam.
am. Nice to be here.
Pleasure to have you on. And can you tell us a little about yourself, Sam?
Well, briefly, I've been politically active for about 45 years or so. I grew
Wow.
up in Maine, working class family. Went through schools there, went off to college in Nova Scotia to Catholic college, St. Francis Xavier. Went from there to Connecticut. Then I went back to Maine and got active in politics in Maine when I was about 23 or 4 years old. And there I joined the Young Workers Liberation League, then the Communist Party. Was working active in the trade union movement there. And then in 1977, I moved to Detroit, where I became the state organizer of the Communist Party there until 1988. And from there, I came to our national headquarters in New York. And then in 2000, I became was elected the national chair of the Communist Party. And I did that until our convention last summer, at which time I stepped down and a new national chair and a new leadership was elected.
Oh wow. And I'm not gonna ask it that way of like how I forgot this guy's name. Are you or are you not the uh, part of the Communist Party? I forgot how it was from a movie or something. I don't know. I saw you on Glenn Beck though one time.
Yeah, that was quite a few years ago. That was my single and only encounter with Glenn Beck. That's quite enough. One's enough.
Oh, by the way, if you don't mind me asking, why are you communist? If you don't mind me asking.
Oh, that's a common question I get asked a lot, actually. Well, when I was I made the transition to adulthood in my 20s, in the late 60s and early 70s. And, at that time, radicalism and radical change was in the air. The country was, we were at war with Vietnamese, trying to prevent their, independence. A lot of things were going on here at home. The civil rights movement, certainly the campuses were very alive with political activity. So in that kind of an atmosphere, I kind of shifted and changed and began to embrace radicalism. And eventually my radicalism took me into the Communist Party. Also, as I mentioned a few moments ago, I grew up in a working class home. My mother and father both worked, and both were trade unionists, not active trade unionists. But I grew up in a working class milieu, so that had some influence too on how I think. And I'd have to add also, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I'm not a practicing Catholic now, but I grew up in the Catholic Church. My mother played the organ. I was an altar boy. And that too, I think, had a shaping influence on my moral sensibilities and outlook. And not everybody who's a Catholic gravitates to the Communist Party, but that was a factor that helped to shape my moral outlook, in the broadest sense. So anyway, I always throw that into the explanation too as to how I arrived at the decision to join the Communist Party.
Wow, and it's pretty rare to find someone who's a communist unless you're part of the Communist Party, which is a website, cpusa.org.
Yeah. We're trying to get into the 21st century, so we're trying to build out our web work and internet work. We have a newspaper, The People's World. Actually, it's not the Communist Party newspaper, but it's a newspaper that we staff, help support, and certainly try to promote too. And we do a lot of stuff education now in the Internet Communication Organization, and so more and more we're a web-based organization, much like many other organizations are.
Wow. By the way, what exactly is the real meaning of communism to you? Because we hear so many misconceptions. Like, I'm not condoning it, but I do encourage freedom of expression. Everybody has their own beliefs. Everybody has their own political stance. Like, I'm not a communist myself, but I don't
Yeah,
mind. Like, I don't mind talking to you about it because
yeah,
you're a cool guy, and I want to hear what you have to say. I
yeah,
don't care what
yeah,
anybody looks like. I just want to hear them out. That's what
yeah,
I was talking to a guest yesterday, and it's all about talking, not fighting. And I don't know if you heard him, Daryl Davis, and to think a black guy could talk to KK members, it's just unheard of. But he
yeah,
actually managed to do it. I don't know if you heard him though.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm for dialogue. I'm for discussion. I'm for democracy, and communists and certainly uh, are for democracy. Should be for democracy. There shouldn't be any war between socialism and democracy, or communism and democracy. Um, Now, in the 20th century, that the experience of the socialist countries has left things to be desired in terms of democratic discussion and input and democratic institutions. But learning from that experience and looking ahead to 21st century and the building of socialism, certainly it has to have a lot of room for democratic involvement, democratic input, democratic discussion. Um, Again, there shouldn't be any contradiction, or there shouldn't be a loggerheads of socialism and democracy. In fact, you can't have a full-blown socialism without deep-going democracy, and I mean democracy that goes beyond simply discussion, simply beyond dialogue, even goes beyond democracy in our political institutions, but also penetrates its way into the workplace and every other institution of life. I mean, for example, if you're a worker, you have very limited possibility for input. How that workplace functions, what they produce, how they produce it, all that. Workers have few rights when they walk into a workplace. So that's another area where, in a socialist society, democracy would invade and would democratize it so that the workplace is democratically run and workers have a large voice in what happens there.
Well, but isn't democracy like where people get to choose who they wanted to be in power, but and communism it could probably be good in theory, but in practice it usually never works out, and the state always takes over, and that's where you lose freedoms, etc.
Well, again, I think some of our practice hasn't been so good, and the people haven't been empowered. So, in some cases, a number of countries have been disempowered. They haven't had a right to determine their future, which includes, but is not limited to, electing their leaders. So there have been some, major shortcomings in terms of the socialist experience in the 20th century, and there's major problems in the 21st. But I think, ideally speaking, I think for socialism to really take root and to fulfill all its potential, it's got to have a lot of room for, again, democratic discussion and input on the part of the great majority of people that live in that society. And again, it's got to go beyond simply electing leaders. People have to participate, be involved in shaping everything that that society does. I mean, in the political arena, shaping legislation, and uh, staffing different governmental institutions. I mean, people have to have a large footprint on everything that happens in that society. The point of socialism, Marx and Engels and others, is to empower working people, ordinary people, to make them, the rulers, the governing class of their particular society. I mean, in a capitalist society, that isn't the case. I mean, working people, can vote every 2 years, every 4 years. They can elect, at least they can have some voice in determining who their leaders are going to be. But, by and large, like in the United States, I mean, the governmental institutions are maybe not they aren't exclusively in the hands of, the wealthy class, but certainly the wealthy class, the 1%, as people say today, they have an inordinate amount of power, to determine what goes on in this country and to really determine who's elected to this or that office.
Of course, because the
I
president
just
is just
read,
a puppet. So
I just read about a meeting, conference in Las Vegas organized by the Koch brothers. The wealthy oil, gas, they're wealthy from oil and gas. And anyway, they raised close to $1 billion for next year's election. Well, that's not a level playing field, but that's emblematic. That's typical of political life in a capitalist society, whether it's here or some other capitalist country.
Oh, so what's the difference between communism and socialism? They're very much alike.
Well, if you read Marx or
Communist Manifesto.
communist society is the longer term goal or aim. Socialism is a transitional society, but the transition is stretched out over decades. So in a socialist society, a number, the working people have come into, control, and they be the political and economic structures, and they determine what goes on there. But again, it's a transitional society to communism. And if you read Marx, Marx is he doesn't spell it out in any great detail what a communist society would look like. He didn't feel he was able to do that 150 years ago. I mean, it was a future society without one person exploiting another person. It's a society in which he says the state will wither away. He talks about ending the division of labor between intellectuals and workers, and ending the division between city and country. So anyway, it's a society in which every individual has a full opportunity to develop all their creative talents and powers. So he spells it out. He spells it out very generally, but he doesn't try to fill in all the details because it wasn't possible at that point. It isn't even possible now. But he was more of a general vision that he hoped, society, politics and society, people. That's the direction he hoped they would move in. But understanding that's a long-term, distant goal.
In some countries, especially in South America, they're actually socialists themselves.
Well, up to a point. I think if you ask most of those leaders in the countries you're speaking about, they would probably say their goal is a socialist society, a society that eliminates exploitation, eliminates poverty. poverty and gives everybody an equal opportunity to develop all their abilities and talents. But they would probably say they're in a transition to socialism. They're not yet a socialist society at this moment, but they're in a transition. And at the end of the road, that's what they hope to achieve. But that's an interesting, experience. What's happening in Latin America, because they're using the electoral arena. They're using positions and elected positions in the government and in the state there. I think to end the great inequalities that exist in those countries. To level the playing field, to give people greater opportunities, and to take the natural resources of the country out of the hands of the oligarchy or a few individuals, and put it into the hands of the people. So it's a great experiment, and they're I think breaking new ground, and there's much to be learned from that experience.
But so, in your view, they're succeeding, but can a communist country work in the long run?
Oh, I think yes. I think yes. My answer is yes to that. I think despite all the difficulties and problems and weaknesses and shortcomings that were evident in the socialist experience in the 20th century, and even today, in the socialist countries, there are weaknesses and shortcomings. I still think our country, the United States, would be much better off if we move in that direction. Ending the enormous inequalities that exist in this country, ending racist discrimination and oppression, ending gender discrimination and oppression, addressing the issue of climate change so that future generations can live. And I think for a capitalist society, like in our country, where the 1%, the top layer of corporations dominate life so much, it makes it difficult really to address the most pressing problems that the people in this country are facing today. I mean, for these big multinational corporations, for the 1%, who control most of the wealth, their main preoccupation is to amass greater and greater wealth. And they have not much interest in beginning to address these other problems that tens of millions of people are facing. So I think to solve many of the problems that we're facing today, we got to move in the direction of socialism. And eventually, I think we have to begin to build a socialist society.
But apparently most people don't like that because there's not one seat in the Senate or House of Representatives for the Communist Party.
Well, that's true, and as I said, this isn't a short-term project. It's gonna take. A lot's going to happen before we get to a socialist society. Including, I think, there'll have to be a changing perception among the American people about what socialism is all about or what socialists are all about. And, that will take time. But, it's funny because, the public opinion polls mention the word communism. You don't get too much support from people. They think it's undemocratic and totalitarian. And you think of, this thing. But socialism doesn't have quite the hard edge, that communism does. And people, I don't say it's not a dinner time item that people discuss at this moment, but people will listen came out of the deepest economic crisis that we had since the Great Depression in the 30s. People are still hurting. I mean, unemployment has gone down some, and I hear, at least among some workers, wages are beginning to nudge up. But for tens of millions of people in this country, there hasn't been much of a recovery. And they're looking for ways to make a better life for themselves. And so the ideas of ending inequality and creating jobs and raising wages and taking some of the power from the corporations that have so much power, all those things have appealed to them. And they aren't socialist as such, but they do begin to move in a socialist direction.
Even though like since I'm not communist myself. I'm not a communist myself, but we both can agree on that the corporations do have too much power over the citizens. That you cannot deny.
Yeah, they do. They have enormous power. I just mentioned about this meeting in Las Vegas with the Koch brothers, where they put together close to $1 billion for the coming elections in 2016. I mean, that's not fair. They have a much bigger voice, say, than you or I do, and that shouldn't be the case. I mean, accumulate wealth, go ahead and do it. But wealth shouldn't determine the outcome of politics. They shouldn't determine who's elected or not. That should be done by the citizens of this country, and everyone should have the same ability to determine whatever the outcome might be in elections. But that's not the case now when you have these wealthy owners of this or that corporation, or owners of oil and gas. They have so much wealth they can have a big hand because of their money in determining the outcome of elections and who gets elected. And of course, they want people who represent them in their interest when they get into the corridors of political power. Most instances, they don't represent my interest or your interest. They represent the interest of the 1% and making their situation even better than it is. They're in the game to raise wages, to make life fair, and to end racism and discrimination. That's not what they're all about. Or to have universal child care or health care available to all at affordable prices. That's not what they're all about. They're all about making their fortunes even bigger and their friends' fortunes even bigger.
Well, but countries that would be communist, they don't seem that like they're working out. Like China, it may seem like they're doing good economically, but they probably have a bigger bubble than ours, and they probably have more deep economic issues than we do. And North Korea, the Stalinistic is not working at all for the citizens. It's like literally hell there.
Yeah, I've never been to North Korea. I mean, I've read stories about it, and from my point of view, that's not a socialist country. It's not either now, and I don't think it's in the process of building socialism either. More in some ways, it's more like country with that's sort of organized along feudal lines, with kings and monarchs and all that sort of thing. China, on the other hand, is growing at a rapid pace. Has been growing at a rapid pace for a long time. They have lifted, UN reports point this out, lifted millions of people out of poverty, and of course they have over 1 billion people there. So at the same time, they have this growing inequality too. They've given a lot of space for a capitalist interest to set up shop there and draw in workers into their plants and factories and workplaces and exploit them. And so you have kind of a contradictory situation developing there with millions on the one hand escaping poverty, economic development that includes large numbers of Chinese people, but on the other hand, you also have this growing concentration of wealth in the hands of this emerging capitalist class, some of whom are Chinese, and in a lot of instances you have foreign corporations who set up shop there. And I think in China too,
You been there?
there needs to be a much more deepening of democracy there. I think there's far too little of it right now.
Have you been to
And,
China?
yes, I've been there on 2 occasions.
You probably met with the governor, didn't you? In Beijing.
I met with some of the top officials in both the government and the Chinese Communist Party, and had interesting conversations with them, mainly about what was going on in China. They wanted to convey to us where the country is at, where it's headed. They have a long transition, they say, to socialism. They don't expect to get there until mid part of this century, something like that.
I never been to China myself. It's very expensive to go there.
Yeah, it is.
And like even in universities, you would get like courses to like be able to go to China for like maybe a semester.
Yeah.
But your view is that capitalism is bad. But aren't you confusing the crony capitalism and thinking it's real capitalism?
No, I don't think you can really separate the crony part of capitalism from the real part. The real part needs the crony part. I mean, I'll give you an example of that. In about, in the late 70s, the U.S. economy began to slow down. Production in some of the old manufacturing centers grew less profitable for different reasons. And rather than invest there, in those old lines of production, and the capitalist class, both here but also around the world, began to move into financial markets here. And that was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then for the next 25 years or so, it was the build-up and money flowing into financial markets that stimulated the economy. And you had a lot of speculative investing and speculative activities going on, and all this though helped to buoy up the overall economy. In other words, what I'm saying is that the real capitalism depends, in this instance, on the speculative capitalism, and the overall economy would not have grown like it did. What didn't set any records, but it grew, and even in the 90s, wages increased a bit. But by and large, that was the result of this expansion of the financial speculative sector of the economy. I mean, there was the high-tech boom too, but it was these bubbles created in the financial sector, that stimulated the economy. So you can't have one without the other. That's the point I'm trying to make, especially now.
Oh, what about what would like communism bring upon the industry and like the environment? And for example, like if it's you, because you believe that the state should probably run things, or let's say most people believe that the ideology is for the state to run everything. What if the state wants to shut off power in a certain amount of hours just to save energy, and eventually it's like a tyranny? I
Well,
don't think you would like that.
no, I don't think so. I wouldn't like it. But see, in a socialist society, the point isn't that the state would run everything. You can have different ways to organize workplaces and production, uh, other than state ownership and control, from above. Uh, you can have cooperatives, workplaces. Uh, you can have workplaces that are run on a regional level, or even a community level. So there are a lot of different ways to organize workplaces that accents cooperation rather than ownership by a single person or a single corporation. The state would not, invade every workplace and determine what's produced and how it's produced. Although I'd say, in a socialist state, socialist government, at least ideally, it would be a representative government. It wouldn't be a government that is by and large determined by what the wealthiest layer of the people in a particular society wanted. But hopefully it'd be a government where ordinary people have a footprint, have a foothold in the government, and a large, really dominant say in what that government does.
Because like eventually, and like you think that even if the state would be benevolent and like actually make things better for the people, wouldn't bad people just like take control of it? Like it would go to the wrong hands, or it would just get out of hand. So either way,
Well,
how would
that's
you
why
prevent it?
you got to have accountability and control and checks and balances, built into your system. And they can take a lot of different forms. I mean, for example, regular elections, where candidates have to go before voters and account for themselves. That's one thing. We do that. We do that now. But there are other ways in which citizens, could have, control over what happens in their governing institutions. So yes, there's always a problem of corruption and wrong-headed decisions and all that. And it's true, you got to have accountability, control, and checks and balances, so that no institution, governmental institution gets kind of overarching power over the whole society. I mean, we have that a little bit now in our constitutional setup. There's supposed to be checks and balances between the different, main branches of government. So we'd have to further develop that, I think, so that you have institutions that are democratically run and fully accountable to the people that elect their representatives.
Oh, that would if well things are not might not be like that because like it depends who's on. So like it may happen. Maybe in theory it could probably work, but there's not one communist country to my knowledge that has succeeded, at least for very long.
Well, I'd agree with that. I think there's much room for improvement. There are a lot of shortcomings, but I'm talking about what the goal and aim should be in a socialist society is that governmental institutions are controlled and accountable to that the people that they are supposed to represent, and there got to be different ways and mechanisms that make that possible. Going beyond simply the right to elect new representatives and governmental institutions accountable for carrying out, our will.
Or like the word comrade, like yeah, that's the one I heard before from you
Yeah,
kept saying that one. By the way, there was one cartoon done in the 1920s, 1930s. It's called Make Mine Freedom, and like not to attack you or anything, but like the cartoon it showed the ism, which showed like for communism how it would take over and free enterprise would be gone. I don't know if
yeah.
you've heard of a cartoon.
I haven't, but I can imagine.
Yeah, because like what happens in the cartoon is like basically, oh yeah, 1948. It's basically how America really like started, and like
Yeah,
you see one guy that's ism when some people would say Obama, and you got a bunch of people representing the citizens. One that's for farmers, one's for business, blue collar, white collar,
yeah,
and then the ism like tempts them into you having this bottle, which it would actually they had to sign away their freedoms, and then like every like they and eventually that it would, in the simulation that it would actually be bad because the thing is whenever they after they took the bottles after John Q. Public it talks about this story like
yeah,
they their lives start to change, their lives are upside down, people would get kicked out of their own property, there would be there would be all kinds of trouble, and basically their lives would be upside down. They would be in the concentration camps, some of them, and like that's probably people would probably like disagree on the communism. But I don't know if you heard. You should look up that cartoon.
okay, I'll do that.
But what do you think on the like the misconception apparently on communism? Because like, is there a lack of freedom of speech? Let's say. What about guns? Like I
Well,
wouldn't.
I'm for gun control, both in a socialist society and here as well. We don't have it though in a lot of states at this moment. There are a lot of misconceptions about socialism, about communism, and there's no mystery, why that's the case. I mean, it's in part, the socialist experience has given them, fodder to make, to distort, what the socialism is all about. But also, the powers that be, the 1% in this country, they don't want socialism, and they control the major media. They have a say what's taught in the schools,
Of
textbooks, how
course,
they're written, all that.
that's indisputable fact. But like,
Huh?
if there was gun control, I don't know sure if you're aware of this one. It's called the Dick Act of 1903. It was adopted in 1902, but like if passed in 1903, it talks about
Yeah.
the Second Amendment that it can never be repealed because and the gun control be considered like basically useless because if it were to be repealed, it would attack the second and it would attack the Second Amendment.
Well,
So yeah.
these amendments, to the Constitution were written, what, 300, 200 and some odd years ago, and they were written there. They're shaped by that particular time. Uh, we live in a very different world in which they lived, and the Constitution, the amendments, and our governmental institutions should adapt to changing circumstances. We can have the right to bear arms, doesn't necessarily rule out regulating the use and availability of weapons and guns and so on.
Wait, but
I'm for gun control. I'm not saying that this or that person can't buy a gun, but it has to be, there should be licensing and gun checks and all that. And but I'm for gun control. I don't think we need a whole array of guns in our cities and so on. It's one thing to buy a gun to go hunting, say, and I grew up in Maine, so when I was had guns because they hunted. But I don't think the proliferation of guns in, say, an urban setting, or any setting really, serves any particular useful purpose.
But I never heard of a communist or socialist country that has guns. Because I go to South America, and my parents are Hispanic themselves. Guns are this, you can't. It's like impossible to have guns. But the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment. So how can you be in a world without guns? You would have to like. I'm not saying like give guns to every single person, but the gun like think of Switzerland. Switzerland, pretty much every citizen has guns, and the crime rate is extremely low.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to check that out about Switzerland. I can't imagine everybody having a gun, but
they're giving everything.
Guns are the foundation of freedom.
Well, it protects the First Amendment, though. In case anything were to go wrong, at the last resort, people would have to fight back as a militia to overthrow the government. If that were the case, it's in the Declaration of Independence.
I mean, if the government isn't behaving right, the main thing is to, organize through our existing political channels to change it. I mean, the whole notion of.
I mean, if it like the government becomes like a police state, or it's becoming that. You would have to like have guns because they would want to take away your guns. That way, you can't get out of a messy situation in case it would actually go to that point. Because imagine nobody has guns. Political power comes from the barrel of a gun.
Again, I think the main thing is for people to organize in their numbers politically and otherwise. I think to change a government that they're dissatisfied with. I don't go into this. I don't go for this gun violent business. It's wrong-headed, I think, and counterproductive.
Well, political power comes from the barrel of a gun, though.
We don't need bloodshed to make change in this country. What we really need is people who are engaged, in political struggles of one kind or another. That's what we need. If you look at the history of this country over the 20th century, that's what's done it. That's what's made change. People in large numbers who are engaged in day-to-day struggles to make their country better. That was true in the 30s, it was true in the 60s, and it's going to be true in this century, too.
But, like...
What changes things are big numbers of people who join together and have a political vision and purpose in mind. And then they go about doing that peacefully.
No, I'm just talking about like last resort, because political power comes from the barrel of a gun. If you give only the government guns, you got North Korea. If you give everybody guns, you got Switzerland. Which do you prefer?
Yeah. I don't think everybody has a gun in Switzerland, but I'll check that.
But
anyway,
I'm just trying to make a
political
point.
Power comes from a barrel of a gun. What comes from the barrel of a gun is bloodshed and unnecessary violence. Power comes from people who are active and united and engaged and have a vision. And they'll then go about trying to make that vision real. Like the people did in the 30s, or like the people did in the 60s. That's how change came about. It's organized movements of people struggling non-violently and peacefully to make change.
Mm-hmm.
But those are facts.
Yeah,
that's real.
Yeah, we want to stop crime, but like I cannot help by looking at that video when it comes to people saved by guns. It's like 24 minutes long. You should look it up on YouTube, and like it's like when you look at it, it's like in some sense like the heartwarming, because people's lives are saved in that video. One guy defends his grocery store from like a few thugs with his gun and saves his family's life. Another would be like almost mugged.
On the evening news, I hear enough about guns and violence.
I guess people have to be educated with what is the power with guns, because some courses, I think, like just like they teach sex ed at school, they will teach how to kids like what exactly how dangerous a gun is. They will teach them about it. That is some states, but I'm not saying that they do it everywhere. I think they should do it
Yeah.
everywhere to educate people. But I'm saying that is like just like sex ed is part of like the curriculum, teaching about guns is that, but like it's only in few schools.
I don't agree with that. I think again, I think that we'll be better off as a country if we can get guns more and more out of our homes, out of every school certainly. Uh, we if we want to make change in this country, we do it peacefully and non-violently. It's the right wing that makes the big fuss about guns. I think for the movement of working people in this country, I think the only way really is to bring about changes through nonviolent, organized, united action of millions. That's what it's got to be all about. Anyway, I think I'm running out of time.
Oh yeah. Oh, but before you go,
Yeah.
what would you? I guess what would you say to everyone who's listening? Even though they probably won't agree with you, but what would you say to them in like your own perspective? Well, what would be your message?
My message would be to do everything they can to make a more just, a more fair, a more equal world. You don't have to embrace socialism, certainly communism, to do that. But I think each one of us, especially now, because we have up against so many difficult problems, people are really struggling. Families are struggling, and so I would urge people to, join the struggle to make this a more equal and just, and again, a peaceful world.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be my message.
All right. Well, it was awesome having you on, Sam.
Yes, Christopher. Nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you.
Same. And in a few months in the future, I wouldn't mind having you on again. So whenever you want.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You too. Bye. That was Sam Webb. Even though I don't agree with the ideology, everybody has a freedom of speech in this country. I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. Voltaire. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But when you're talking, you're not fighting. So, communism may not be the best thing, but there has to be agreements that we both agree on. The rich have too much power over the people. The people do need to be more represented more, not the corporations. That is a fact. You have to agree with that one. It's some things you will agree on, and it's not bad. And it's good to talk to people. Try it yourself. Be open minded and talk to people, even if you may not agree with them. You never know what you'll learn from them, and you never know what they may learn from you.